Good afternoon, Cengiz.
Good afternoon.
It's very nice to see you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm also glad to see all of you here today.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
So according to my clock, it's time to start the webinar if we're all prepared. So my name is Douglas Herrick. I'm not on the agenda, but I'm stepping in to very big shoes left by Péline Atamer, who unfortunately is not feeling very well today. I am part of the central team along with Péline Atamer. My name is Douglas Herrick. I am in the Environment Directorate of the OECD, working along with Krzysztof Michalak, who's also on the call, and Péline Atamer on the Sustainable Infrastructure Program in Asia. Which is a program active in 6 countries and financed by the government of Germany, the Environment Ministry of the government of Germany, through the International Climate Initiative. So I just wanted to acknowledge our partners here for this webinar, the University of Central Asia, which that are hosting us today. Part of their excellent preparations included interpretation, which you can activate by pressing on the little glow button at the bottom of your screens if you need it. So it's simultaneous interpretation between English and Russian. As to what we're talking about today, we have 2 3-letter initialisms that'll be the topics of discussion. RBC, the Responsible Business Conduct, something that many of you will already be familiar with, but there's always more to explore. And the other one, ESG, which is of course a very hot topic in several spaces. Regarding RBC, the OECD, we have excellent experts here from the OECD RBC Center. The OECD happens to be the foremost repository for standards and legal instruments regarding responsible business conduct. And this is really an exciting space, especially in the region of Central Asia. Kazakhstan joined the primary instruments of RBC in 2017, and there's been growing momentum elsewhere across the region, including in Uzbekistan. I'm joined here on the call by Santosh Persad and Dylan Van de Ven, who will speak during the first half of this webinar, and also another colleague from the RBC Center, but speaking on the topic of ESG based on a recently released report, is Benjamin Michel. I think that's pretty much all from me. I wanted to warmly welcome you all to this call. I've been asked to send the kind regards from Péline, who's on the call, but just not feeling great. And I will pass it on over to Kanat for opening remarks from the University of Central Asia. Thank you.
Thank you, Douglas. My name is Kanat Telikeyev, and I represent this very important for us event. But a very interesting presentation from our colleagues from OECD on responsible business conduct and the ESG principles, and we're quite happy to be part of sustainable infrastructure program in Asia, activities in Central Asia plus Mongolia, and we're very happy that we have quite a big group of people who registered on this webinar. Yesterday we calculated more than 100 people interested, and at the moment we see that more than 50 already joined today, and we're quite happy that also we will continue this activity during the course of this year, and 2 more webinars planned to be held in June and probably in October. And you will be in our, let's say, looping of our activities, and we will invite all of you and probably try to extend our network to include as more people as possible in Central Asia plus Mongolia. Thanks a lot, and I think it's a good time now to provide the send for Santosh and Dylan.
Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Kanat. Thank you, Douglas. So Douglas, yeah, if you could start the slideshow, perfect. Thanks so much. So my name is Santosh Parsad. As Douglas said, I work at the Center for Responsible Business Conduct at the OECD in Paris, and together with my colleague Dylan van der Veen, we are going to present in this first session. Before starting, allow me to thank everyone on the call who had exchanged with us during the research and shared their experience. That was very helpful, so thanks very much for that. Douglas, if you can move to the next slide, and I'll briefly show today's agenda for this first session. So Dylan is going to start and explain what responsible business conduct is and why it matters for sustainable infrastructure. Then I'm going to present our preliminary findings from research on how Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and Uzbekistan are doing to promote responsible business conduct in infrastructure development. We'll hear from colleagues from the countries who will share their experiences. And if everybody manages to be brief, then we'll have time also for a bit of questions and answers. And with, yes.
Sorry for interrupting you for a moment. I need to say that Nagima just upload Google Drive link where you could find people who could find presentations on both languages. So if you prefer to see presentation in Russian or in English, you can select and download and see simultaneously on your laptops or computers or maybe mobile devices presentations in your preferred language. Thank you. Sorry for that.
No, thank you so much, Kanat. And indeed, yeah, it's perfect. Colleagues from the University of Central Asia kindly translated our English presentation into Russian to make it as accessible as possible. And thank you also for the translators. So without further ado, then over to Dylan for the first part of our presentation.
That's great. Thank you, Santosh. So my name is Dylan van der Ven. I'm a policy analyst at the OECD Center for Responsible Business Conduct, but based in the OECD Istanbul Center, working especially on Central Asia, the Middle East, North Africa, and Turkey. The OECD is publishing a series of 4 papers that analyze the role of responsible business conduct, or RBC, for sustainable infrastructure. These papers aim to identify opportunities and include policy considerations to promote and enable RBC for sustainable infrastructure development in each of the countries analyzed. The 3 for Thailand, the Philippines, and Indonesia have already been published, and the 4th and forthcoming one is also the topic of discussion today, which is RBC for sustainable infrastructure in Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and Uzbekistan. We'll briefly present the importance of RBC within the infrastructure context before going into the preliminary findings. Could we please go to the next slide? Thank you. All 3 countries have placed infrastructure development at the heart of their own economic development ambitions and strategies, as well as in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and the country's net zero ambitions. We see that Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and Uzbekistan have all set out top-level policies that aim to significantly expand and modernize their energy and transport infrastructure. These strategies also globally target mining and industrial transformation. Each government's carbon neutrality commitments, as well as their green transition strategies, require investments not just in renewable energies, but also in ensuring energy efficiency and reduced emissions in infrastructure and industry. Can we move to the next slide? So what is the role of RBC within all of this? Well, it's clear that businesses contribute to economic and social development in many positive ways. However, business activities can also have negative impacts. These include poor working conditions, pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, and acts of corruption, for instance. And RBC sets out the expectation that all businesses, regardless of size, public-private ownership, legal status, and so on, address the negative impacts of their operations and value chains on people, planet, and society, while contributing to sustainable development in the countries where they operate. The OECD due diligence guidance sets an expectation that all businesses identify and address negative impacts of their operations and that address these negative impact of the operations and value chains aligned with the 6 steps of the due diligence process, in accordance with the United Nations, OECD, and International Labour Organization standards. These expectations are based on risk. So essentially the likelihood of a risk occurring and the severity, or how bad or impactful the risk would be when it does occur. I won't go into detail in each of the 6 steps that are explained here on the screen, but I do want to underline that the idea isn't that the framework goes or expects companies to be perfect at everything, everywhere, all at once. Instead, the framework encourages companies to prioritize their most significant impacts and engage with business partners and stakeholders to create meaningful and incremental improvement over time. As Douglas already alluded to, you might already be comfortable or familiar with ESG, environmental social governance, or CSR, corporate social responsibility. And these terms are related to responsible business conduct. We'll hear more about ESG and RBC later, but in short, ESG and CSR are a little bit more specific and targeted, looking either at specific elements of RBC or only based on a company's own operations. In contrast, RBC is more encompassing and looking at not just financial, but also non-financial impacts across the board and across supply and value chains. Can we go to the next slide, please? RBC enhances the quality and sustainability of infrastructure, but it also helps mobilize and attract new investments in infrastructure. First of all, RBC can improve infrastructure in multiple ways, and thereby its quality. By using natural resources and inputs more efficiently, companies create less waste and can improve their operating margins. Due diligence also helps infrastructure companies understand supply chains. Meaningful stakeholder engagement throughout their own operations and the supply chains allows a company to prioritize the risks and determine the best response to each of these risks. This allows them to prevent disruptions and be more resilient to shocks where they occur. For instance, as a result of climate change, due to flooding or extreme weather events. It's also important to consider the cost of acting irresponsibly, so the other side of the coin. This is the damage to the environment. Businesses can cause significant damage, not just through pollution, but also within communities. And thereby they can lose the social license to operate, meaning that the local communities where businesses operate do not support the firm's operations anymore. This can result in a standstill of operations and significant losses. Not to mention that poor working conditions can lead to accidents or fatalities, a common element across infrastructure in many countries. Regarding the investment angle, investors increasingly focus on ESG risks and performance because they are convinced that these investments deliver better returns for themselves. They also often expect companies in countries abroad to align with RBC expectations back home. And this is crucial because we see emerging RBC and due diligence legislation in many countries, including in 75% of OECD member countries that have regulations on RBC, which are usually modeled on OECD instruments. By integrating RBC, companies can prepare for these emerging regulations, improve their business resilience, and attract the necessary investments in sustainable infrastructure. At the same time, businesses will contribute to government policy objectives for sustainable infrastructure and help protect people and the planet. Next slide, please.
All right. Dylan, I take over, correct?
Correct, please do.
Yes, thank you so much. And yes, as Dylan just set out, all of the countries, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Uzbekistan, are heavily investing in infrastructure for their sustainable development. And at the same time, each infrastructure investment can create adverse impacts. And this is something we also see in the 3 countries, that sometimes these adverse impacts can be considerable. So we can see industrial activities that contribute to air pollution that endanger human health. As one of the examples, we know that there are incidents where workers are injured or even killed in work-related accidents due to insufficient safety measures. And there also have been high-profile cases of corruption that have been discovered and prosecuted in infrastructure sectors. And there are other examples of adverse impacts. That is recognized in top strategies in the three countries to address these adverse impacts. And this is also translated into significant efforts to revise regulatory and policy frameworks. And so, for example, Mongolia and Uzbekistan revised their legal framework on labor to enhance the alignment with international standards. And Uzbekistan has alone ratified 8 ILO conventions since 2020. Kazakhstan revised its environmental code, and later we will hear more from colleagues about efforts under the code to introduce best available technologies. Mongolia led a process to review environmental impact assessments, and they developed new regulation so that these impact assessments also consider social impacts, for instance, on livelihoods. And this consideration of social impacts would be a significant improvement, and that could also inform countries that for now in their impact assessments only consider environmental considerations. However, in all of this, what is important is that better regulation translates into better practice and does not stay on paper only. This is really an important issue, and reviews in the country, also by the government, have identified a range of challenges for better compliance. And in response to these challenges, to give an example from Uzbekistan, the government has increased fines for environmental violations. They strengthened environmental monitoring mechanisms and created a specific Deputy Prosecutor General's Office for environmental crimes. I should also stress the important role of inspection services. And in the three countries, what's important is that these services are adequately resourced so that they can fulfill their mission. And one aspect that's also relevant is that labor inspections should be able to conduct their missions and inspections unannounced. In the three countries, corruption remains a challenge. What I can do here, I think, is simply point you to OECD monitoring reports that have been issued only a few months ago under the Istanbul Anti-Corruption Action Plan. There's a report for Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Uzbekistan each, and also for other countries in the region. And they provide extensive recommendations on the overall environment for anti-corruption, as well as how to enhance business integrity. Next slide, please, Doug. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just getting instruction to speak slower. Yeah, it's a typical challenge for me. I'll try. And thank you so much for the translators for their efforts. So when we look at the enabling policy environment for responsible business conduct, we see a number of interesting dynamics. So on the one hand, we see large businesses that are more and more aware of the expectations in international markets. So they have adopted policies on RBC-related issues. They are issuing sustainability reports with information on how they address environmental and social and governance risks of their operation. Overall, though, the awareness of responsible business conduct in the business community and also the policy community is still somewhat low. But we see initiatives ongoing. Douglas mentioned in his introduction, Kazakhstan is a front runner in that in 2017. They adhered to OECD instruments on responsible business conduct and are promoting responsible business conduct, including through a national contact point on responsible business conduct. Mongolia in 2023 launched a national action plan on business and human rights, and similar efforts are ongoing in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. And Uzbekistan is also increasing its attention to responsible business conduct as part of its efforts on enhancing the investment environment. And I would like to stress that these initiatives that often involve different actors across government are really an important opportunity to bring together all stakeholders, both across government and also outside government, to coordinate efforts on responsible business conduct and jointly track and discuss progress, bringing in ministries that work on infrastructure-related sectors and beyond. And so we would strongly encourage the countries to seize these opportunities. A second aspect is stakeholder engagement. Meaningful stakeholder engagement, Dylan mentioned before, is really central to responsible business conduct. Stakeholders help identify and monitor adverse impacts of business operations, and their views are also essential to determine response measures and remedies. And it is therefore important that local communities, civil society organizations, human and environmental rights defenders, and trade unions are in a good position and feel at ease to voice their concerns when they see that there are maybe problems with the business operation. And so for the three countries, it is important that civic space is there for them to operate, and that stakeholders are empowered so that they can play their role in responsible business conduct, and at the same time signal to investors that the environment is good for RBC. As an example in this space, Mongolia was the first country in Asia to adopt a law on human rights defenders in 2021. A third aspect is when businesses actually do cause harm, which does occur, of course, then there's a need for access to remedy. And so in the three countries, we see that some cases are resolved by courts, especially when it comes to labor rights violations, by national human rights institutions. We know examples from the ombudsman in Uzbekistan, who's interceding with authorities and businesses on behalf of citizens, and also complaints mechanisms of development finance institutions. And the national contact point in Kazakhstan is also a non-judicial grievance mechanism. There are also some examples of multinational and state-owned enterprises that have complaints mechanisms in place. But more needs to be done to make access to remedy effective. Here, a good example could be from Mongolia in terms of recognizing that there are challenges and identifying ways forward. So the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights sets out measures to, on the one hand, improve the overall judicial system, such as through digitization, and on the other hand, strengthen capacity of those actors dealing with cases on business and human rights, so that they know better how to do this, both with companies, but also then the National Human Rights Commission and actors in the judicial system. Next slide, please. So a third aspect that we have looked at is the role of the state in economic policy and as a commercial actor. And let me start with state-owned enterprises, because this is really an important opportunity as state-owned enterprises occupy a very important role in the economy of the three countries, including infrastructure sectors. There's a clear OECD standard in this regard, OECD guidelines on corporate governance of state-owned enterprises, which state explicitly that the state should set high expectations for state-owned enterprises' observance of responsible business conduct standards, together with effective mechanisms for their implementation. And we can see actually good examples for this in the countries. So in Kazakhstan, the sovereign wealth fund, Samruk-Kazyna, requires state-owned enterprises that the fund owns to develop action plans on sustainable development, explicitly mentioning OECD standards. And after our presentation, we will also hear more from Uzbekistan, where the government has made sustainability reporting of state-owned enterprises mandatory and launched an initiative to strengthen management of environmental, social, and governance risks. And this is a great dynamic. Then we have sustainable finance on the right of the slide and public procurement, where we see opportunities to do more, building on the frameworks that are already in place. So on sustainable finance, there's already a strong dynamic in the three countries. So as an example, Mongolia has put in place a green and now an SDG taxonomy and reporting guidance. And we also see commercial banks in the countries now issuing green bonds, starting green credit lines. And we think there are opportunities to really expand on this and bring this closer to infrastructure financing. And a possibility could be to work more with those financial institutions that finance infrastructure, such as national development banks. Finally, on public procurement, the state as a large procurer can play an important role in incentivizing responsible business conduct. And legislation in the three countries already allows for considering environmental aspects and life cycle cost. And now in 2024, both Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan also introduced sustainable procurement. And I can quote from Kazakhstan, with the aim of ensuring optimal and efficient spending of funds, as well as achieving social, economic, and environmental aspects of development. So this is really an excellent basis to incentivize businesses to behave better through procurement. But the next critical question is how to translate this into practice. So procurement authorities would require guidance and support to make best use of such provisions. And quite similar reflections apply to regulation on public-private partnerships, especially then for infrastructure projects. So let me end with this and hand over back to Dylan for our final slide.
Very briefly, we'd like to also share the opportunities for regional dialogue going beyond today's session, where we have some of these peer learning examples from the region, to highlight that many of the adverse impacts or negative impacts of infrastructure projects are not limited to a single economy or a single boundary. Thereby, they need to also consider the impact on trans-boundary projects, whether it is on energy or transport that impacts more than one country. Of course, companies themselves can do this through meaningful stakeholder engagement from government, from businesses throughout their supply chains, as well as from civic society and the workers' association and communities that could be impacted by one of the projects. But there's also a role for the government to participate in this, either through bilateral or multilateral platforms for dialogue or international fora. And I'd like to single out one in particular, which is the Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation Forum, or CAREC, which aims to discuss energy and transport infrastructure, to mobilize and attract investments into these sectors, and is also a platform that raises awareness on ESG, and would be thereby well suited to look at the more regional dimension, how to improve the intra and intra-regional connectivity of Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Uzbekistan, and the other countries in the region. Now, putting this to good practice, we'd also like to hear from some of the countries themselves. And it'd be my pleasure to invite Ms. Almurzayeva Saltanat Ibrahimova, who is the head of the Expert Assessment Department of the Bureau of Best Available Technologies at Kazakhstan's International Green Technologies and Investment Project Center, to say a few words. We also invite the participants who are listening in and joining us today to also share any questions either in the chat or directly to Ms. Ibrahimova and Mr. Tengiz Asanov, who will speak afterwards on behalf of Uzbekistan, so to also have a more informal discussion, opportunity to exchange directly with examples of government policies to enable and promote RBC. With that said, Ms. Ibrahimova, the floor is yours.
Салям Есдерме, добрый день, уважаемые участники сегодняшней конференции. От лица Международного центра зеленых технологий и инвестиционных проектов я рада поприветствовать вас сегодня на 4-м региональном вебинаре. И меня зовут Альмурзаева Салтанат Ибрагимовна, являюсь руководителем управления экспертной оценки Бюро по наилучшим доступным техникам. Наш центр был создан в апреле 2018 года с целью продвижения зеленых технологий, поддержки бизнеса для повышения конкурентоспособности экономики, улучшения качества жизни населения и снижения негативного воздействия на окружающую среду. Основная функция центра заключается в создании условий для внедрения и развития экологически чистых технологий, а также в поддержке предпринимательства через реализацию инвестиционных проектов в сфере зеленой экономики. Также хочу отметить, что наш центр является единственной организацией в Республике Казахстан, уполномоченной на разработку справочников по наилучшим доступным техникам. И, как всем известно, целью применения наилучших доступных техник или НДТ является комплексное предотвращение негативного антропогенного воздействия на окружающую среду и повышение ресурсоэффективности. Переход на принципы НДТ представляет у нас поэтапный процесс, и первым этапом у нас считается проведение комплексного технологического аудита предприятий. Это процесс экспертной оценки применяемых на предприятиях техник, направленных на предотвращение или минимизацию негативного антропогенного воздействия. При этом отмечу, что КТА является превентивной мерой, обеспечивающей параллельное развитие экологической и индустриальной политик. Внедрение НДТ дает предприятиям и обществу множество преимуществ, включая экологические, экономические и социальные, такие как снижение объемов эмиссий, отходов, экономия природных ресурсов, снижение финансовых затрат, когда предприятия сокращают расходы на ресурсы, оплату штрафов за превышение норм, соответствующих, рост конкурентоспособности, так как компании, использующие НДТ, соответствуют международным практикам и стандартам, что облегчает выход на внутренние и мировые рынки. И, наконец, это долгосрочная экономическая выгода, то есть внедрение НДТ требует инвестиций, но в дальнейшем эксплуатационные расходы снижаются. Если же говорить о социальных преимуществах, это улучшение условий труда, повышение репутации компании, наконец, это повышение уровня социальной ответственности компании. И, как я уже сказала, наши национальные справочники по НДТ разрабатываются на основании данных предприятий, прошедших комплексный технологический аудит. И хочу отметить, что на сегодняшний день за период 2021-2025 годы нашим центром проведено аудита более чем на 100 предприятиях различных отраслей экономики. И на основании этих данных были разработаны и утверждены постановлениями правительства соответствующие национальные справочники по НДТ. На сегодняшний день уже утверждено 16 справочников по НДТ, которые покрывают потребности самых крупных предприятий и крупнейших отраслей экономики Казахстана. Некоторые предприятия на сегодняшний день уже начали внедрение НДТ в рамках их комплексных экологических разрешений. То есть они модернизируют и модернизировали свои производственные процессы, что привело, соответственно, к превосходным показателям по снижению эмиссий. Они внедрили технологии, позволяющие уменьшить воздействие на окружающую среду, однако, несмотря на достигнутые успехи, остаются определенные вызовы. И среди них это необходимость обновления оборудования, обучения персонала, финансирования проектов. Для эффективного внедрения НДТ требуется сотрудничество государства, бизнеса и общества. И в целом наше государство делает значительные шаги в направлении устойчивого развития через внедрение НДТ, а также для полного перехода необходимы консолидированные усилия нашего общества. Также хочу отметить, что в настоящее время проводится большая работа по созданию Центрально-Азиатского бюро НДТ. Данная инициатива была Казахстана, и она была презентована на КОП-29 в Баку буквально в конце прошлого года. И в настоящее время мы движемся, соответственно, в этом направлении. Спасибо за внимание, Рахмет. Пожалуйста, вопросы.
Thank you so much for this example. This has been excellent, and I think also shows with this last remark on the Central Asia office that, yeah, there's space for more interaction between the countries to learn from one another. With that, I would like to invite our colleagues from Uzbekistan, Tengiz Azanov, and then open to questions and answers to everyone. And also to encourage, as we had asked, the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change in Mongolia, who unfortunately is not available. If any colleague from Mongolia would like to take the floor, we were very happy to give it to them. But first, over to you, Tengiz. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Santosh. I'm really glad to see you all today at this event and address on behalf of our ministry. And special thanks I would like to express to University of Central Asia and OECD for organizing this webinar with important discussion on responsible business conduct and sustainable finance. In Uzbekistan, infrastructure investments are central to our sustainable development strategy, Uzbekistan 2030, which will enable us to expand our transport infrastructure, power generation, gas and mineral extraction, and to enhance our industrial infrastructure. And to this end, we recognize that RBC is essential to maximize the impact of from such investments to infrastructure, since RBC ensures that our businesses align with society needs, attract quality investments, and minimize harm to people and environment. Our efforts align closely with the objectives of SIPA program to make sure that the infrastructure investments are compatible with low emission development pathways and SDGs. Let me share how Uzbekistan is advancing these principles, particularly through our collaboration with the OECD and recent RBC and ESG initiatives. First, Uzbekistan has been making significant steps in integrating RBC principles into the legal and policy framework of the country. Thus, we have included such principles in our newly drafted law on investments and investment activity, which is now at its final stage of approval. And explicitly, the draft law contains key principles for working with investors and investments, like to promote RBCs. And by doing this, we aim to attract domestic and foreign direct investments that ensure significant contribution into achieving UN's SDGs, including poverty reduction, health of population, quality education, rational use of natural resources, increased processing and production capacities, green economy development, as well as ensuring protection of human rights. To engage investment community in Uzbekistan to discuss the RBC issues in 2024, a working group on RBC was created under the Foreign Investors Council under the President of Uzbekistan. And we believe that our further work on RBC, including development of a separate legislation framework, will properly address policy recommendations in the SIPA report on RBC for sustainable infrastructure in Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and Uzbekistan. I would like also to add that we had a recent presidential decree on measures to support SME development in Uzbekistan with approval of SME development strategy for 2025-2030, which also includes RBC implementation in Uzbekistan on SME perspective. That includes, among other things, having ratings, having positions of Uzbekistan companies in international ESG ratings, like MSCI ESG ratings, S&P Global ESG scores, Green Business certification, and expanding application of extended producer responsibility in Uzbekistan. So these are innovations which we will be implementing in nearest future in Uzbekistan on SMEs. Another key milestone for RBC development in Uzbekistan is the OECD's investment policy review, which was launched last year in March, with a final product in form of a roadmap for sustainable investment policy reforms. This project is supported by the EU and ADB and uses OECD tools like the guidelines for multinational enterprises to strengthen our investment climate by developing recommendations to improve transparency, sustainability, and due diligence, making Uzbekistan more attractive for FDIs while aligning with global standards like the Paris Agreement and SDGs. This forthcoming review will contain a separate chapter on RBC in Uzbekistan and provide valuable recommendations on RBC development in our country, particularly in regards to state-owned enterprises. In this regard, Uzbekistan has also undertaken several initiatives to promote ESG principles and RBC within its state-owned enterprises. We introduced mandatory ESG reporting, as it was already mentioned, for SOEs with state ownership stake of 50% or more. There was a presidential decree on that, approving a state program for year 2024. And each year until July, large SOEs are required to disclose annual ESG performance reports and implement corporate social responsibility initiatives. This policy aims to enhance corporate governance, transparency, and accountability and its SOE operations. Our Ministry of Economy and Finance, jointly with Assets Joint Stock Company, last year has developed a comprehensive roadmap for sustainable development of state-owned companies according to ESG principles. This roadmap outlines measures to improve corporate governance, increase openness in management activities, and ensure public access to information on SR and ESG practices. And key performance indicators include carbon intensity, water usage, emission of pollutants, waste generation, work-related accidents, and financial disclosure in line with international standards. Our State Assets Management Agency updated corporate governance rules for SOEs to include RBC requirements, which are based on the OECD guidelines for corporate governance of SOEs. Rules require that SOEs adopt adequate environmental, social, and labor standards, and develop a stakeholder policy and implement a code of ethics. As an example, some large SOEs in Uzbekistan, in the energy sector, in the mining sector, have already adopted sustainability policies and issue respective reports. In some sectors like transport, more attention needs to be paid to ESG compliance and reporting, as well as great attention to RBC due diligence by SOEs. In general, all these efforts are part of the country's broader strategy to align business practices, particularly for SOEs with international standards and foster sustainable development. As we move forward, Uzbekistan is eager to learn from the experiences of our neighbors in Central Asia and beyond. And I would like also to say that the upcoming first European Union Central Asia Summit in Samarkand, starting from tomorrow, underscores the strategic importance of our regions and the potential for increased cooperation in sustainable development initiatives. Concluding, I would like to say that we remain committed to advancing our reform agenda, improving our investment climate, and aligning our business practices with global sustainability standards. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Tengiz, for this example from Uzbekistan and the range of efforts you're already undertaking. Before opening the floor, I would briefly like to check if any colleague from Mongolia would like to come in spontaneously. There's no, I mean, as you feel, but there are interesting things happening in Mongolia on sustainable finance, on business, on human rights, on environmental impact assessments, all of which are interesting, I think, beyond within the region and beyond. If that is not the case, then
Can I intervene for a minute? There was a question to Green Finance Center about projects, green investment projects in the chat. If possible, we can first answer this. Yes.
Yes, your hand is raised. You're also
Спасибо большое за вопрос. Всю информацию вы можете получить непосредственно на нашем сайте. Там же есть контакты наших специалистов, и более подробно и детально они пояснят по каждому проекту и по участию.
Спасибо большое. Santosh, we can move further.
Okay, thank you very much. It's just there's a time delay with the translation, but I hope it's okay. So just to check, is there any questions either to us, to colleagues from Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan on this part of our presentation? So our report will soon be issued once it's fully finalized, and then we'll also be happy to share the link with you to this publication, and you can already find the reports on Southeast Asia if that is of interest to you online. If there's no questions at this stage,
may I send one question?
Please.
Yeah, very sorry, may I ask you in Russia for auditorium? Okay. Да. Доктор Бахыт Исекина, Зеленая академия. Мы являемся партнерами проекта SIPA OECD. Спасибо за организацию. И вопрос все-таки, наверное, ко всем коллегам, которые действительно фундаментально исследуют вопросы инфраструктуру, да. Еще раз большое спасибо Университету Центральной Азии также за поддержку данного вебинара. У нас вопрос возникает по таким фундаментальным понятиям. Значит, все-таки мы говорим сегодня об инфраструктуре, и хотелось бы все-таки понять, есть ли критерии вообще самой оценки инфраструктуры, да, то есть что мы можем относить к инфраструктуре? Это не только НДТ, это не только ответственное ведение бизнеса, это не только ESG. Очевидно, здесь все-таки вопрос должен быть какой-то более вопрос по, значит, вообще самой методике, значит, отнесения инфраструктуры к углеродной либо неуглеродной, да, инфраструктуре. Это первое. Второе, вопрос, ну, наверное, ко всем участникам, вот, поскольку это семинар, наверное, дискуссия тоже нужна. Второй вопрос у меня к представителю нашего уважаемого МЦЗТ, Салтанат, к вам, да, по НДТ все-таки, наилучшей доступной технологии. Мы уже, по-моему, третий год слышим про эти 16 справочников, которые разработало наше уважаемое министерство во главе Центра зеленых технологий. Вчера буквально совещание было у министра экологии господина Насамбаева о том, значит, как раз-таки диалог с предприятиями, как внедряются наилучшие доступные технологии. Не кажется ли вам, что все-таки необходимо проработать механизмы стимулирования внедрения НДТ, потому что вот как раз-таки введение значит, экологических разрешений в соответствии с экологическим кодексом, наверное, это все-таки недостаточный стимул. Спасибо. Если непонятно, я еще раз напишу вопрос. Спасибо.
По моему вопросу можно отвечать, да?
Да, пожалуйста, ответьте.
Спасибо большое за вопрос. Почему мы говорим в течение этого времени, как вы сказали, в течение 3 лет слышите про 16 справочников? Дело в том, что мы сейчас говорим обязательно только об утвержденных. 4 справочника в настоящее время находятся на утверждении, я поэтому их пока опускаю. То есть вы сами понимаете, что процедурно это занимает определенное время. И как только они будут утверждены, соответственно, количество справочников уже изменится. Это первое. Разработка справочников также занимает определенное время, большое время, там до 1,5–2 лет разработка и утверждение справочника занимает. Далее, по методам стимулирования. В настоящее время, как вы правильно подметили, только в рамках перехода на комплексное экологическое разрешение предусмотрены определенные преференции для предприятий, которые будут работать в рамках КЭР. То есть идет освобождение от эмиссии, предприятие имеет возможность использовать все эти финансы на модернизацию и реконструкцию. Также 130 статьей Экологического кодекса предусмотрено зеленое финансирование и так далее, то есть через банки второго уровня, через систему Байтерек, но эти моменты сейчас также находятся в работе. То есть постепенно, возможно, и в средствах массовой информации по некоторым банкам, например, банк Центр Кредит, уже сквозь призму ESG рассматривает финансирование предприятий. То есть механизм запущен, и постепенно это принимает уже большой оборот.
Спасибо за вопрос. Если можно, еще одна ремарка. Значит, буквально недавно мы обсуждали, есть такой совет по устойчивому развитию при НПП, вы знаете, да, и совет, который обсуждает вопросы внедрения ESG в Казахстане, в бизнесе, как раз в реальном секторе. Очень остро стоит вопрос по стандартам, национальным стандартам ESG, потому что вы знаете, ESG-рейтинги, они тоже очень разнятся, различные международные структуры оценивают предприятия по ESG. Но когда мы говорим о том, о доле зеленых инвестиций вообще в общем объеме или же о доле внедрения зеленых технологий, вы сами понимаете, что цифры просто плачевные, да, посмотрите национальную статистику. Поэтому здесь вот вопрос к вам как руководителю, все-таки управление очень ответственное, важное для внедрения НДТ. Посмотрите вопросы именно по национальной стандартизации в области внедрения зеленых технологий. Это первое предложение. Второй вопрос по стандартам ESG. Да, вот сейчас я вижу среди участников у нас есть Николай Посыпанко с РГ. Мы эти вопросы уже несколько раз поднимали на различных уровнях, но вопросы ныне там. Вопросы национальной стандартизации внедрения ESG – это тот конек, который, в общем-то, должен уже из области теории перейти к области практики, да, то есть все-таки мы много говорим об этом, но у нас очень тяжело и долго внедряется зеленая технология. Это один из элементов все-таки инфраструктуры, да, о которой мы говорим. И второй момент. Я участвовала в 2018 году при написании концепции создания зеленого центра. Уже тогда поднимался вопрос, что вопросы именно углеродной нейтральности, да, они должны быть во главе. Извиняюсь, я заканчиваю. Вопросы углеродной нейтральности, вопросы СО2, они должны стать во главе внедрения НДТ. Вот с этим как у вас? Спасибо.
Давайте постараемся чуть побыстрее, потому что у нас все-таки регламент. Мы по повестке должны уже двигаться дальше, поэтому как можно. Спасибо.
Давайте тогда я предложу, Бахат, непосредственно с вами на контакт выйдут специалисты, и по вашим моментам будут отработаны вопросы.
Спасибо.
Thank you very much, and sorry for this. So we'll discuss more on ESG also in a moment, together with our colleague Benjamin Michel. On the first question, just to say very briefly, when it comes to what do you consider when you invest in an infrastructure, I think our important message is you have to look at what you want to achieve with the infrastructure, but then also you need to consider what are the adverse impacts that might be created through the infrastructure. And that can be directly within the neighborhood, the environment, as you very well know, but also within the supply chain. So sometimes if you construct something and you may source material in that supply chain, there may be issues in terms of forced labor or in terms of environmental damages from that supply chain. And then you need to look at these together. And I think one example that might be interesting is doing this early on in design. And in Uzbekistan, they did a sustainable asset valuation exercise for a road project. And so that, I think, shows also how you can early on identify how to design a road in a way that works best, both to achieve a good road and at the same time do it in a way that limits any adverse impacts. Anna, I see there's one more hand up very, very quickly, and then we'll see how we handle that question and then move on to the next part of our presentation. Please, Anna.
Hello, I'm very much sorry for interrupting your reglement. I will be quick, and my question goes to Mr. Asanov. Because at UNEC, we deal now with energy connectivity of Central Asia issues. So I'm interested to know, how do you assess the level of cooperation in the field of creating investment environment, cooperation between all the ministries in your government, and also in the context of transboundary cooperation with other Central Asian countries? Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for your question. Yes, we at the beginning of our way on RBC at the moment, and our projects jointly with OECD on IPR, it activated this interaction between the agencies and ministries. And that also includes creating a task force where we actually meet and discuss and try to draw a common opinion on various issues related to RBC and other investment-related issues in Uzbekistan. So yes, we pretty much eager to promote such kind of interaction and work further on this.
All right, thank you so much. Then let's close this first part of the session. Benjamin, apologies, and then directly over to you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much, Santosh, for the introduction. So I think we talked about a lot of different topics at the beginning, and I'm going to build on the previous discussions. Maybe just to give you a bit of background about the report that we conducted and we published earlier this year, and how it relates also to the topic of the discussion, especially sustainable infrastructure. So maybe to give you a bit of context. So OECD estimated that we need around like 6.3 trillion a year in investment in infrastructure to support and to achieve the sustainable development goals. You can put this number to 7 trillion a year if you want also to have like an infrastructure will also align with the Paris Agreement. So in that situation, we need sources of financing coming from everywhere, including from the private sector. But to date, this is mostly public debt or multilateral development banks who are financing infrastructure, and we see limited involvement from institutional investors and especially foreign investor in their willingness to invest in infrastructure, especially in non-OECD countries. So I think for us, what we want to understand is how to better drive these private investments in sustainable infrastructure, and what would be the role of ESG ratings, and including most specifically the matrix were underpinning the different topics covered by ESG ratings agencies. Next slide, please. So we also, colleagues from the OECD have also conducted a report last year. It's called the Global Corporate Sustainability Report. And from that, what we see that sustainability reporting and the issuance of ESG information, sustainability information is becoming mainstream, but mostly at the top of the biggest multinational enterprises. So as you see, it's like around over 20% of the biggest listed companies globally, but this 20%, they represent 96% of market capitalization. So it shows that issuing sustainability information, ESG information is becoming mainstream, but mostly for the biggest players in the markets. So the goal is really to show that we need to issue information more broadly, more efficiently. And that also from the study, what we understood is that the issuance of ESG information is not only driven by regulations, it can also be driven by simply resources and the response to investors, and especially institutional investors asking for this information from potential investing companies. Based on that, the OECD, in response to the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group, we decided to undertake a study to better understand what we call the quality, availability, and comparability of the different ESG metrics that are being used by ESG rating providers in their rating products, to understand what are actually the key data points, going very granular, like understanding the data points who are underpinning all the different issues, and especially, as mentioned, to assess quality, comparability, and availability. Next slide, please. So the methodology, what we did is that first we decided to select 8 major ESG rating products. We looked only at what we call corporate ESG rating products. We didn't look at, there are other types of products in the market. You can have like sovereign ESG ratings looking at ESG performance by the government. You have also specific climate benchmark to understand the alignment of specific products, services of companies, specific activities with the Paris Agreement. You have what we call controversy screen, where we're looking at the potential reputational impact of companies, especially their impact on people and planet. But for us, we really remained at the level of corporate ESG, like the assessment of a business performance under a wide range of sustainability issues. Based on that, we collected around like 2,000 data points or ESG metrics. These are indicators who are underpinning the measurement of business performance against a wide range of different sustainability issues. Overall, when you look at the 8 ESG rating products that we looked at, they can have the number of metrics that they have, they can range from around 100 to 573. On average, they have like 250 metrics per product. So that can give you an indication of how many metrics a rating product is going to use to assess broad sustainability performance. So it's really around like 250 metrics. That's what they use to assess performance of a company on sustainability issues. We also try to have a diversified selection of products, especially in the way that they collect data. You have some ESG rating products where what we call purely internal data collection methods, meaning that they're only asking companies to provide themselves the information. So it's going to be like they are going to ask the companies to provide reports, pay slips, the results of an impact assessment, the different policies that they have in place. And based on all the information that they collect about companies, they are going to develop their ratings. You have a few other ESG rating providers who are doing what we call purely external data collections. It means that they don't really look at the company's internal documentation, but they look at external reports from civil society, from NGOs, from also governments, from media, newspaper, to better assess the external factors that are affecting the companies. And what we try also to understand is to have like a diversified selection of products in terms of what we call the different materiality approaches. You may be familiar, and that relates to what Dylan was talking about, like the difference between ESG and RBC. Most rating products that we looked at, they have what we call a financial materiality approach. It means that they look at mostly, they assess the performance in terms of the potential risk the company can create in terms of as an investment, in terms of bottom line. Like, is there a financial risk of investing in these companies, but looking at the potential financial risk arising from ESG factors. So in that case, they will look at different types of metrics, especially like to manage risk or exposure of the companies to a specific risk, for instance, climate risk. Some also include specific information related to impact materiality. It's going to be like the impact of the company on people and planet, its contribution to climate change, potential involvement in a human rights controversy, potential impact on local communities, and it's kind of issues. Next slide, please. So looking at that, we took a step back and we tried to classify the information, also looking at how the rating products themselves, they classify this information into the 3 main pillars of ESG, environment, social, and governance. So we identified 23 in total ESG topics that were really recurring and coming in almost every product. And these different topics, we also try to identify the different characteristics of the metrics that were underpinning the measurements of the business performance over these different topics. We identified what we call 4 main types of data characteristics, what we call policies and activities. They are mostly input-driven metrics. Policies, there are like, I have a commitment, a net zero target, a commitment to respect human rights. I have a transition plan. I have these kind of documents and policies who are really explaining the aspiration and the objective of the companies in terms of sustainability issues, and usually it lays out like the way that it's going to do it. I'm going to achieve my net zero commitment, my CO2 emission reduction targets, or how many trainings I'm going to have on human rights issues, how many suppliers I'm going to engage with. That's usually the kind of metric that we're looking at. You have second, what we call activity-based metrics. That's mostly all the measures, like I'm conducting an impact assessment, I'm doing a due diligence on my supply chain, I'm also conducting trainings for my employees, I have a stakeholder engagement plan in place. So that's the different types of metrics that are also being asked. And then we have also what we call the output metrics. That's in a way two types of metrics. That's either the adverse impact on people and planet. So do I have a scandal? Do I have an incident that happened in my business environment, or in my supply chain, or in my also business operations? But that's also the results, the quantifiable results of the activities that I just undertaken. For example, how much reduction in CO2 emission have I achieved? How many employees have I trained? How many suppliers have I already assessed? So that's going to be the output of the measures and the activities described just before. And finally, we have what we call the business environment metrics. That's different metrics who are being asked, but that are completely independent of the business in itself. It's going to be the location of my headquarters. It's going to be like the how much of my supply chain is exposed to climate risk, or this kind of stuff. And finally, we also try to explain how these different metrics are either qualitative. It's usually like a non-numerical data. It's like a document, or just ratings the existence of a document, the quality of this document. So that's going to be like mostly what we're going to see among the ESG data. But you have another part of the data which is more quantitative. It's like energy consumption, turnover rates among my employees. But that's fairly limited and only applicable to a few number of topics. Next slide, please. And finally, what we did is that we did two types of assessment. First, we pulled the 2,000 metrics that I mentioned together, and we looked at all the metrics, irrespective of the product that they were from, and we tried to understand the key trends and the key findings that were emerging from this pool of 2,000 metrics. So what we call the analysis across rating products. And to really look at the comparability of the products, we also looked at how the different products were structured compared to one another. So really was an assessment from the 8 products, looking at them like comparing each other. Next slide, please. So these are the key findings that we identified during the looking at the study. First, for us, what was the main findings is that the vast majority of the metrics that we looked at, almost 70%, are what we call input-based metrics. They're purely disclosure-based metrics from the companies that report doing something or having a policy on a topic. That's what we call like the effort of the companies in terms of sustainability issues. Even though the term effort sometimes can be a bit excessive, because having a policy, we can argue it's something quite easy to do. For us, what we see from this trend is the risk that we are going to go through too much maybe tick boxing, where a company and large companies will have the resources to provide a lot of information and to respond to all the requests from ESG rating agencies. And that's what's going to create a bias in large companies having usually higher scores than smaller companies, SMEs, or especially also companies in emerging markets. One of the second findings is that some topics are completely overlooked, mostly a lot of social related topics, but also biodiversity, taxation, competition. Sometimes they're completely ignored from specific products. Finally, for us also, we looked at the fact that metrics, the number of metrics to assess one topic can vary a lot, sometimes 27 times more metrics to assess one topic compared to another. There is really a range of different metrics to assess one topic from one product to the other. Like sometimes you have like, as we can see on the slides, you have one product using almost 115 metrics for assessing corporate governance performance, when another product would only use 4. So it means that the way that performance over a number of topics varies a lot from one product to the other, and that there is various understanding of what performance means for a product, for these different products. And finally, what was interesting for us, especially coming from the OECD Center for Responsible Business Conduct and our due diligence guidance, that you have a very limited number of metrics looking at supply chain issues and the management of the adverse impacts in your supply chain. So it's only 7% of the metrics who relates to supply chain risk management. And looking at due diligence metrics who are like outside a specific topic, who are really holistically looking at the performance of a company in terms of conducting due diligence, it's even less, it's 5% of the metrics. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to very quickly deep dive into these 4 key findings. So first, as I mentioned, there is a lot of imbalances and gaps across different topics. As you can see on the figure, is that at the level of the big pillar, environment, governance, and social, there is a more or less comparable, even distribution of metrics. There is almost like around 80 metrics per product to assess these big pillars. But when we go granular, when we go like at subtopic level, there is a lot of discrepancies. And as mentioned, like some topics are completely disregarded, like climate adaptation, biodiversity, human rights, engagement with communities, corruption are quite overlooked, and especially when we compare from products to products. Next slide, please. So yeah, that's what I was saying, is that also, in addition, the divergence is especially important when you look at the way that these products are being measured. Here, what you see on the slide is the different characteristics of the metrics when we compare them to different products. So each dot relates to an ESG rating product. And as you can see, there is like very limited overlap in the way that they look at and they use metrics with similar characteristics to measure the same topic. And that's what we saw as a correlation, is that at least we can see some correlations for metrics where there are a lot of quantitative metrics. So the more a topic is being measured through quantitative data, for example, CO2 emissions and climate related metrics, energy management, water management, that are usually measured using a lot of quantitative metrics. There you can see some kind of alignment among the products, but the more you go into qualitative metrics, the more disagreements you get in terms of how to measure the performance of a business. And next slide, please. The third finding for us is that what I mentioned before is really the prevalence and the high reliance on specific types of metrics, and especially looking at what companies disclose and input-based metrics. For us, we see that can be an issue, especially for us. What we see is that input-based metrics, usually policies or measures being put in place, there are usually proxies for measuring performance. There are not a measurement of the direct performance. For example, if you look at CO2 emission, your performance and how it should be assessed is how far you're achieving your reduction targets. Like how many CO2 emission have I reduced year on year? That should be more or less like the best practice to measure the performance of a business, at least on this topic. But if you measure it using only like, do I have a net zero target? Do I have, I don't know, trainings on climate risk? That's interesting indicators, but there are maybe proxies to measure the performance. So for us, same for human rights. Just having a training doesn't really say much about the effectiveness of this measure to address the human rights issues among your employees or in your supply chains. So maybe a better indicator would be, what share of my suppliers have I engaged with on human rights issues? So that's where we see for us like it's almost like the low-hanging fruits, where we're trying to develop some metrics where easy to respond and to provide, but they are sometimes fairly limited in terms of what they say actually about the performance. Last slide, please. And finally, as I mentioned, the final findings for us was that there is very limited information about supply chain issues. Most of the metrics on supply chains, they relate to scope 3 emission, but there are like very limited information about like the company's performance on human rights, biodiversity, corruption in their global value chains. So that can become an issue. I think that's everything from me. I think we have also colleagues now that would like to also provide their insights. Let me give the floor now to Mrs. Zakupova, Deputy Director of External Review at the
Sorry,
Aston
Benjamin.
International Finance Center.
Sorry to interrupt you. Actually, we'll have to flip the interventions because one of them has to leave a little sooner. Sorry about that, Ainur. If you don't mind just waiting a couple more minutes, we have.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you so much. My apologies. Sorry, go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, so I will give the floor to Mr. Pozipankov, Head of the Sustainable Development Center at the ERG Kazakhstan.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. As far as I can see, the auditor is half Russian speaking, half English. I believe I'd better make such statement in Russian, just not to confuse anyone. I hope the interpreters will do their work just fine. Большое спасибо за приглашение к участию. В принципе, примечательна была первая часть конференции, где мы говорили об инфраструктуре и о ответственном ведении бизнеса. Здесь хотелось отметить, вот с точки зрения бизнеса, я сегодня представляю большой промышленный конгломерат, который большей частью в Казахстане работает. Первично все-таки, наверное, первично не политики, не инструкции, не стандарты, первичные риски, которые видит для себя бизнес. Риски и негативные воздействия. И, конечно, например, горнодобывающие компании, они по умолчанию должны вести бизнес свой ответственно. И я думаю, что это так и есть. Мы десятки лет уже работаем с добычей полезных ископаемых, влияем на окружающую среду, очевидно, и повышенное внимание уделяется и этому, и вопросам взаимодействия с другими стейкхолдерами, как сотрудниками, с государством и так далее. Опять же, по цепочке создания стоимости. Поэтому вот с этой точки зрения, чтобы мы постепенно развивали ответственное ведение бизнеса, нужно просто, чтобы предприятия лучше осознавали реальность этих рисков. Реальность рисков, там, sustainability риск, как мы называем, рисков устойчивого развития. Потому что сейчас есть, наверное, определенный гэп. Мы о каких-то рисках можем знать, о каких-то можем говорить, но в значительную часть из них мы, честно, не верим, да, порой. Поэтому вот этот, наверное, процесс длинный, и он должен пройти, чтобы все это увенчалось успехом. А что касается вот второй части по рейтингам, спасибо большое за доклад. Интересная работа была, я так понимаю, уже проведена. Вот с того, с чем мы сталкиваемся, я бы хотел отметить, что рейтинги очень полезны. Они позволяют посмотреть на себя с разных точек зрения, с того, как видят тебя какие-то внешние эксперты, внешние агентства вот, рейтинга, и немножко взвесить, насколько ты, может быть, так хорош, как ты думаешь, или где-то так плохо, как тебе казалось. То есть они должны добавить как объективную картинку для того, чтобы предприятия лучше управляли своими процессами. И здесь, мне кажется, именно в этом их суть и роль. Но и здесь есть и проблема. Вот мы участвуем в нескольких рейтингах, мы, конечно, стараемся быть прагматичными, во всех подряд не участвуем, выбираем какое-то ограниченное количество, чтобы тратить меньше для этого усилий. Но видим, что зачастую методологии, которые применяются, они усложненные, возможно, где-то избыточно, где-то обоснованно, они даже на грани, скажем, непрозрачных, да, методологий с точки зрения бизнеса. И очень много все еще остается субъективных выводов по каждой метрике, по каждому вопросу со стороны эксперта рейтингового агентства. В итоге это превращает отчасти участие в рейтинге в лотерею, да, для бизнеса. Ты, может быть, твой ответ понравился, может быть, не понравился, и ты в зависимости от этого получаешь ту или иную оценку. И чтобы превратить это вот для нас в какой-то управляемый, предсказуемый процесс, реально требуется очень много усилий, чтобы залезть в голову рейтинговому агентству и понять, а как он все-таки интерпретирует те или иные слова и содержания. И насколько я понимаю, Европа вот двигается сейчас в ту сторону, чтобы создать некие правила и рамки для работы для рейтинговых агентств, чтобы этого не допустить. Но мое вот личное мнение, как представителя того, кто вот потребитель этих рейтингов, участвует в них, непосредственно, я считаю, что если эту проблему не решить, то вообще смысл существования рейтингов немножко теряется. Поэтому эта проблема очень острая. Вот. И прозвучало сегодня еще, что мало инвестиций в зеленые проекты, мало инвестиций в зеленую инфраструктуру. Я вот хочу заметить, что очень важно именно для инфраструктуры, для энергетической или неважно там какой, создавать понятные правила игры для государства. Потому что, когда мы, например, говорим об угольных электростанциях, то и инвестируя сегодня в угольную электростанцию, которая проработает 30 плюс там, до 70-80 лет, и мы не имеем четких параметров того, в каких условиях она будет работать. Начиная от правил работы на энергорынке, потому как сколько она сможет энергии своей разместить там с учетом развития ВИЭ, и заканчивая экологическими требованиями и иными всякими аспектами, которые могут серьезным образом повлиять на ее работу. И здесь я считаю, что как раз роль государства вот для развития инфраструктуры в создании понятных прозрачных правил. Если они не появляются, то бизнес меньше будет просто инвестировать. Если нет определенности, то бизнес не пойдет в ту или иную технологию. Поэтому здесь должно быть повышенное внимание государства к выбору технологического пути, вообще, в принципе, к принятию решения целесообразности инвестиций в ту или иную инфраструктуру, потому что мы понимаем, что инфраструктура может быть избыточной. Да? Может быть, в какой-то момент рынки говорят «строй», но на самом деле это избыточно, это не нужно. И здесь совершенно точно от государства нужны шаги, которые даже не то, что связаны с ответственным ведением бизнеса, а просто связаны с тем, чтобы добавить здравого смысла в долгосрочном инвестиционном решении. Вот несколько вот таких вот, скажем, ремарок. Большое спасибо за возможность высказаться. Если есть какие-то вопросы, я готов на них тоже коротко ответить.
Вопрос в чате был к Николаю. Проводите ли вы финансовую оценку климатических рисков для компании? Максима Титова.
Финансовую оценку климатических рисков для активов компании. Ну, вопрос такой, конечно, проводим, но мы проводим ее не по всем возможным, там, например, климатическим рискам. Потому что на данном этапе мы тоже идем где-то по пути от осознания рисков к интерпретации выводов из них для использования в наших операционных процессах. Мы оценили все основные риск-факторы рисков устойчивого развития, уже выбрали те риски, по которым оценки проведены, это самые существенные риски, и там эти оценки есть. И есть еще ряд климатических рисков, оценок по которым они будут в будущем, ввиду того, что здесь компромисс между количеством усилий и степенью этого риска тоже имеет место быть. Надеюсь, понятно.
Вы тоже подняли руку, но давайте только быстро, ладно?
Хорошо, спасибо большое, да, извиняюсь. Но у меня вообще комментарий к презентации. Дуглас, да, по-моему, делал презентацию по поводу, что очень трудно СО2, климатические там индикаторы оценить. Вы знаете, я принципиально не согласна с этим, потому что есть очень хороший индикатор, углеродоемкость продукции. Между прочим, я думаю, что коллеги с ОСР тоже знают, что в 2019 году был презентован первый национальный отчет по Green Indicator. Он внедрен, кстати, частично в национальной статистике Казахстана. Да, Зеленая академия в этом участвовала. Вот, поэтому я считаю, что именно в ESG надо учитывать и для оценки предприятий, регионов и так далее, учитывать именно углеродоемкость. Это будет очень хороший индикатор, кстати, Николай, для вас тоже подсказка о том, как предприятия участвуют в углеродной нейтральности, потому что вот сейчас идет разработка дорожной карты, вы знаете, в Казахстане по реализации стратегии. Как раз мы этот индикатор обсуждаем. Спасибо большое.
Бахыт, а у нас на самом деле в корне нашей стратегии декарбонизации, как ESG, как раз показатели углеродного следа и сидят. Потому что если эту тему немножко развить, например, страна, дала себе цели в Парижском соглашении выбросы в абсолюте снизить. И тем самым может оказаться так, что страна себе некоторым образом делает ограничения на развитие экономики. Потому что мы пока не можем структурно полностью изменить экономику на низкоуглеродную. И если мы хотим наращивать выпуск стали, например, наращивать выпуск, скажем, горячебрикетированного железа, которое в европейских чистых электродугосталеплавильных печах можно использовать, то это все выбросы парниковых газов. Поэтому если мы будем ставить себе вот сейчас необоснованные, амбициозные абсолютные цели, то надо понимать, что либо мы их не достигнем, либо мы свою экономику останавливаем. Именно вот, поэтому я здесь с вами абсолютно согласен. Углеродный след продукции, именно это наши цели, снизить его, значительно сократить к 1935 году по основным нашим продуктам. Вот. Здесь, я думаю, что это даже практика и на страновом уровне должна тоже применяться.
Спасибо, согласна.
Okay, so we can move to the finalization of our meeting today.
Oh, actually, not quite, Kanat. Sorry. We have one more response from Aynur Jakubova, who's been waiting patiently. Aynur, if you'd like to make your remarks. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Douglas. Good afternoon and good morning to some of you, maybe. Thank you for inviting to this webinar. So let me share my screen. Okay, can you see my presentation?
Absolutely, it's perfect.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, today my presentation is going to be on ESG landscape in Central Asia. In particular, I'm going to focus on sustainable finance area. So
Seems like
so let's first start from why we need sustainable finance, why we need financing for achieving sustainability. As we probably all know, the climate and sustainable development agenda, ESG agenda, are gaining momentum globally, and of course, Central Asia is not falling behind. All countries in Central Asia have ratified the Paris Agreement and pledged to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, and some countries like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan went even further by setting targets of achieving the carbon neutrality by 2050, Kyrgyzstan, and by 2060, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Of course, achieving these ambitious goals requires enormous amount of financing. Therefore, it is important to integrate ESG into the financial sector and stimulate financial sector to finance sustainable projects, including green projects and social projects. And as I told, it is very important that financial sector include ESG in their business practices. And this should start from, first of all, financial regulators. For example, in Kazakhstan, the Agency for Development of the Financial Markets and Regulation of Financial Markets have adopted the roadmap for implementation of ESG principles in Kazakhstan financial sector. And according to this roadmap, the voluntary disclosure of ESG information by financial institutions began in 2023, and starting from this year, disclosure of sustainability information is mandatory as part of annual reports. And as of today, 18 financial institutions, including 10 banks, disclose ESG information as part of their annual reports. And also for stock exchanges, there are also very important players of the financial market, and they also should stimulate and motivate companies in other sectors of economy, not only financial companies, but all companies that list their stocks and bonds on the stock exchanges.
Sorry, Aynur, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Would it be possible to put your presentation in diaporama mode, because we cannot see very well your slides?
Okay,
I think
sorry.
you need to click the small button at the bottom right of your screen. No, before that. Yeah, this one. No,
Yeah.
you were on it.
yes.
No, the other one at the left of this line.
Why it's not
Yeah, this
clickable?
one, exactly.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
So yes, there are two stock exchanges in Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan Stock Exchange, KASI, and Astana International Exchange, and they are making also their first steps in imposing the ESG disclosure requirements on listed companies. Interestingly, in Kazakhstan Stock Exchange, the ESG disclosure overall is voluntary, but social and government aspects of ESG are required to be disclosed as part of annual reports. And as for Astana International Exchange, ESG disclosure also voluntary, but they are planning to move to comply or explain basis in the later years. Overall, in Kazakhstan, 79 companies disclose ESG information on stock exchanges. As for other Central Asian countries, I will not go much into details because previous speakers have already shared some information. We can see that in Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, there are already companies disclosing their information. There are already some regulations from the financial regulators. And as for Tajikistan, a national ESG framework is currently being developed in cooperation with the IFC, and last year they presented their first drafts. And as I mentioned, sustainable finance is essential to achieve sustainable development goals, the Paris Agreement and carbon neutrality goals in the region. As we can see, Central Asian countries are not falling behind of the international trends, and they are actively leveraging the innovative sustainable financial instruments such as green bonds, social bonds, sustainability bonds, and others. So according to our estimates, the total ESG finance market in Central Asia is constitutes about $3 billion, and we can see that in all countries of the region, except for Turkmenistan, there have been already issuance of these thematic ESG bonds. As for regulations, only in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, the green finance taxonomy has been adopted, and in other countries, as far as I know, in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, they are in the development process, and they are planned to be approved soon. And as for issuers, we can see that corporate issuances prevail. Like in all countries of the regions, private companies, state-owned companies have issued their thematic bonds, but which is very important is Uzbekistan, that has issued their sovereign green bonds and sovereign SDG bonds. They issued their first sovereign sovereign SDG bonds back in 2021, and also in last year, I think in 2024, like 2 times, and they issued their sovereign green bonds in 2023. And other countries of the region have not issued yet sovereign green bonds. And as for type of issuers, we can say that financial institutions, especially banks, are the most active issuers. And we will see it from the next slide, where I show some issuers, the main issuers in the countries of the region. And as for international standards, you probably know that the main international standards in the area of sustainable finance and climate finance are ICMA, International Capital Market Association, and CBI, Climate Bond Initiatives. And CBI is considered a more stricter standard to comply with. So the only ones CBI certified green bonds are issued so far in Kazakhstan by Development Bank of Kazakhstan. And as for labeled green bonds, which are labeled according to international standards like Loan Market Association, there are also registered labeled green loans in Kazakhstan by multilateral development banks. And as for gender bonds in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, financial institutions, in particular banks and microfinance organizations, have issued gender bonds to finance women entrepreneurs. In particular, they are going to use the proceeds of these gender bonds to provide loans on conditional rates to women entrepreneurs. And here we can see the structure by type of financial instruments. So there are green bonds, social bonds, green loans, and sustainability loans issued in Central Asian countries so far. And as for issuers of sustainable finance instruments, there are some examples of issuers from Kazakhstan, because in Kazakhstan so far have been issued about 30 green, social, and sustainability bonds, and there are only some examples of them, some representatives. For example, Development Bank of Kazakhstan, Entrepreneurship Development Fund, DAMU, they are state-owned enterprises, and they are really taking the lead in attracting financing for green and sustainable projects. The first green bond was issued by DAMU Entrepreneurship Fund back in 2020 to fund the solar power plant in the south of Kazakhstan, and it was supported by the UNDP. As for private issuers, we can see there are some microfinance organizations, renewable energy companies like Kazwind Energy, and also even some transport companies like, for example, the Jet Group, a company issued green bonds to finance the purchase of electric scooters, which is also considered a clean transport. And as for Uzbekistan, as I mentioned before, it is the only country in the region that issued sovereign labeled bonds, which are sovereign green bonds and sovereign SDG bonds. They conducted these issuances with the support of the international organizations such as UNDP, and they listed their bonds on international markets such as London Stock Exchange. And as for local markets, there are some companies like Mortgage Refinancing Company of Uzbekistan that place their green bonds on Tashkent Stock Exchange, and they are going to use the proceeds of the green bonds to provide green mortgages. These are mortgages that are meant to finance mortgages for buildings that comply with energy efficiency standards. And as for Kyrgyzstan, there have been only 3 issuances. They are all banks, so banks are very active in the sustainable finance in Kyrgyzstan. So these banks have issued green bonds and gender bonds. In Tajikistan, so far, only Bank Eshata have issued green bonds, I think last year, with the support of the IFC, who was an investor. And in Turkmenistan, there are not any registered issuances of green and social bonds or other sustainable bonds yet. So I'm representing the Astana International Financial Center, and actually we serve as a catalyst for the development of the green and sustainable finance market in the region. We have Astana Green AFC Green Finance Center as part of the Astana International Financial Center, and we provide consultation services and verification for services for issuers of green and sustainable social and other type of ESG bonds. And the Green Finance Center took its beginning back in 2016 as part of the AFC authority. It was created just a department, and then starting from 2019, Green Finance Center started operating as a separate legal entity. So we provided assistance and support for the issues of first green bonds in Kazakhstan, in Kyrgyzstan, first gender bonds in Kyrgyzstan, first corporate green bonds in Uzbekistan, and also first green bonds also in Azerbaijan. So this is
Sorry
why.
to interrupt you, Ainur, just briefly.
Okay.
This is an amazing presentation. I'm just noting the time. If you don't mind wrapping up the
okay.
next...
Yeah, this is just last presentation.
Oh, is
last
it? Oh,
slide.
fantastic.
Yeah,
Sorry to
this is
interrupt you
last
then,
slide.
Ainur.
No, that's totally fine. So I just want to share about our organization. So why issuers in Kazakhstan and other Central Asian countries are choosing us as a partner is because we are the only company recognized and accredited by International Capital Market Association and Climate Bond Initiative as a verification provider. And as of today, 70% of all green bonds and loans in Kazakhstan have been verified by AFC Green Finance Center. And also we provided our advisory support by developing the Green Finance Taxonomy of Kazakhstan. We serve as a regional chapter of the Green Investment Principles, which is headquartered in Beijing, China. So we are in charge of the Central Asian chapter of these initiatives. And also last year, we have established the Turkic Green Finance Council, and we serve as a secretariat of this Green Finance Council, and we plan to promote the green financing of the organizations of the Turkic state. This is all from me. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I know it was extremely interesting presentation. I hope if you will share it with us, we'll distribute it among the participants. So
Yes, sure.
much more audience could be also reached for our list, because we could distribute it to all registered participants, which I need to again note that it's more than 100 experts and participants of the Sustainable Development Agenda in Central Asia plus Mongolia.
Sure.
Douglas, do you want to add something at the end?
Yeah, I'll be quick. I mean, it's been a really interesting webinar. Our apologies for going a little over time, but I think it's a sign of how much interest some of these topics have generated. I'd like to thank our experts from the OECD Responsible Business Conduct Center, but also all of the country examples that were shared from the AIFC, from the International Green Finance Center, from I'm gonna blank on them now, but it's been really interesting to hear all of your examples, and we look forward to receiving your presentation. I think it was a really good one. I'll hand it over to you, Kanat, to end. Oh, and thank you to the University of Central Asia, of course, for hosting us today.
Thanks to all participants. If possible, I want to ask everybody to put the video to make a group photo, if possible. So as much as possible, people, and we want to show how many people are participated. I know there are some people already, about 10 people left, but still we have more than 50, almost 50. Please put your cameras. And Nagima will make very big photo. Yes? Okay. Thanks a lot. And I hope we will be able to invite all of you and maybe more people to our new webinars. And we will keep you informed about our new events. And I hope it will be very interesting, because it's one of the most, let's say, developing areas of sustainable development in Central Asia. Not many of such activities, and now in the light of growing instability, we still want to confirm that we will continue our efforts to be in the center of change, because even if we face some changing in the policies, climate change and the threats of changing environment is not worsening environment, is not declined. We cannot simply stop it by the political measures. So any efforts which will bring us to the better and safe environment will be, I think, very important in the future. Thanks a lot and goodbye. I hope that you enjoyed very interesting presentation by our partners. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.